The most dangerous words in a marriage are not shouted in anger. They're spoken casually, when the other person thinks you're not listening. My name is Cole Harrison, and the day my wife wished I would disappear was the day I finally understood who I had become in my own home. It happened on a Thursday evening in early September, the kind of evening that smelled like fresh rain on warm pavement. I remember because I was carrying a birthday cake through our front door, trying not to let the box tilt. Natalie's 40th birthday was exactly 30 days away, and I'd spent the last 3 weeks planning a surprise celebration. Reservations at her favorite waterfront restaurant, a weekend trip to Napa Valley, a custom bracelet I'd ordered from a jeweler in Austin. Looking back, the irony almost makes me smile. There I was, trying to create the perfect birthday for a woman who had already started imagining a life without me. The house was unusually loud when I stepped inside. Laughter drifted from the living room. Natalie's friends were over. Amanda Brooks, Stephanie Carter, and 2 others I recognized from years of neighborhood cookouts and holiday parties. I almost walked in to say hello. Instead, I stopped when I heard my wife's voice. Something about her tone made me pause. It wasn't what she said at first. It was how effortlessly she said it, like someone commenting on the weather. Honestly, Natalie laughed. I don't love him anymore. The room erupted in amused chuckles. I froze, one hand still holding the cake box, the front door quietly closing behind me. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood. 19 years of marriage teaches you to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was context I hadn't heard. Maybe she was joking. Maybe there was some explanation that would make those words hurt less. Then Amanda asked, "So why don't you leave?" More laughter followed. The kind of laughter people share when they're discussing something everyone already agrees on. I stood perfectly still, my heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. Natalie sighed dramatically. Because divorce sounds exhausting. Another round of laughter. Besides, she continued, his paycheck is still useful. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even heartbreak, just a strange quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a football stadium after the crowd leaves. Empty, cold, final. Then came the sentence I still hear sometimes when the house is too quiet. Natalie laughed again and said, "Honestly, if he vanished before my birthday, that'd be the best gift anyone could give me." The room exploded. Glasses clinked. Someone nearly choked from laughing. Amanda actually slapped the arm of the couch, and my wife laughed right along with them. That was the moment everything changed. Not because she said it. People say cruel things. Marriages go through rough seasons. What destroyed something inside me was how natural it sounded. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no sadness, just relief. As if the thought of me disappearing genuinely improved her day. I looked down at the birthday cake in my hands. Chocolate mousse. Her favorite. I'd driven nearly 40 minutes after work to pick it up from a specialty bakery. The white frosting carried a simple message written in elegant script. To Natalie. I stared at those words and suddenly felt ridiculous. Like a man showing up to a party after everyone else already knew it was canceled. The laughter continued in the next room. They had no idea I was standing there. No idea their audience had changed. For a moment, I considered walking into the living room, asking her to repeat it, watching the smiles disappear. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe I already knew that once certain truths are revealed, there isn't much left to discuss. So I turned around. Quietly, carefully, I carried the cake back to my truck. The evening air felt colder than before. I sat behind the steering wheel and watched the lights glowing through our front windows. The house looked exactly the same. The lawn I'd mowed last weekend. The porch swing I'd built with my own hands. The flower beds Natalie loved every spring. Everything looked normal. But nothing was. Because for the first time in 19 years, I wasn't wondering how to save my marriage. I was wondering what my life would look like without it. And as I sat there listening to distant laughter through the glass, I made a decision that would change everything. Natalie wanted a birthday gift. She had no idea she was about to get exactly what she asked for. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, exactly like I had for most of my adult life. The alarm sounded. The coffee maker clicked on. The September sky outside our bedroom window was still dark. Everything looked normal. That was the strange part. The world had not changed at all, yet somehow nothing felt familiar anymore. Natalie slept beside me, peaceful and comfortable. For a moment, I studied her face in the dim light. 19 years of marriage teaches you every detail about a person. the faint line near her left eye when she smiled, the way she always tucked one hand beneath the pillow, the tiny scar near her chin from a bicycle accident when she was 12. I knew all those things. But lying there beside her, I realized something painful. Knowing someone and being loved by them are not the same thing. I slipped quietly out of bed and headed downstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla candles and fresh paint from a renovation we finished 2 years earlier. Natalie had picked every color, every fixture, every piece of furniture. Back then I thought that was what partnership looked like. Now I wondered whether I had slowly become a supporting character inside someone else's story. I poured my coffee and stared out the window overlooking our backyard. The swing set was still there, even though our son Tyler had left for college nearly 3 years ago. The maple tree beside it had grown tall enough to cast shadows across half the lawn. Time had moved forward whether I noticed it or not. Looking back, there had been signs. Small ones at first. Natalie stopped asking how my day went. Then she stopped listening when I answered. Date nights became obligations. Conversations became schedules. Bills. Grocery lists. Appointments. We still lived together, but somewhere along the way we had stopped sharing a life. The frightening thing was how easy it had been to ignore. When you work 50 hours a week and spend weekends maintaining a house, normal routines can disguise almost anything. At 7:30, Natalie came downstairs. She kissed my cheek without looking at me and grabbed her travel mug from the counter. The gesture felt automatic, like muscle memory. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied. She scrolled through her phone while pouring coffee, smiled at something on the screen, typed a quick response, then smiled again. A year ago, I would not have noticed. That morning it stood out like a spotlight. "Big plans today?" I asked casually. "Just meetings," she said. "Probably a long day." I nodded. The conversation ended there. 20 seconds. Two people sitting 3 feet apart. It felt colder than any argument I could remember. After she left, I remained at the kitchen table long after my coffee was gone. The silence settled around me. Heavy, uncomfortable, honest. That was when I finally admitted something I had avoided for years. The marriage I thought I was protecting no longer existed. Maybe it had not existed for a long time. I had simply been the last person to notice. Around noon, I drove to a job site outside Austin. I worked as a senior project manager for a commercial construction company. Concrete, steel, deadlines, budgets. The kind of work where problems usually have solutions. Foundations crack. You repair them. Schedules slip. You adjust them. But relationships are different. Sometimes damage happens slowly enough that nobody hears the structure failing until it is already too late. Throughout the afternoon, Natalie's words replayed in my head. Not the jokes, not the laughter, just one sentence. "I do not love him anymore." There was something brutally honest about it. Painful, yes, but honest. For years I had been fighting for a version of our marriage that only existed in my memory. Meanwhile, she had already moved on emotionally. By the time I pulled into our driveway that evening, the sun was dropping behind the trees. Warm orange lights stretched across the neighborhood. Families were walking dogs. Kids were riding bicycles. Ordinary life continued all around me. I sat in my truck for several minutes before going inside. 30 days. That was all that remained until Natalie's birthday. 30 days until the celebration I had spent months planning. 30 days until the future I thought I wanted. And for the first time, I found myself wondering whether those 30 days could be used for something entirely different. The decision did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Small observations. Quiet moments. Things I would have ignored a month earlier. Over the next week, I stopped trying to convince myself everything was normal. Instead, I started paying attention. Natalie had always been protective of her phone, but now I noticed how often it was in her hand. At breakfast, during commercials, while standing in line at the grocery store, even during conversations. Sometimes a message would appear and a smile would cross her face before disappearing just as quickly. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just enough to make me wonder who was getting the version of her that I had not seen in years. One Tuesday evening, I was loading dishes into the dishwasher while Natalie sat at the kitchen island answering emails, or at least that was what she claimed she was doing. Her phone lit up. She glanced down and smiled. A real smile. Not the polite one she gave me. Not the tired one she wore around neighbors. This one reached her eyes. The expression lasted less than 2 seconds before she locked the screen and set the phone face down. Funny how 19 years of marriage can teach you the difference between every smile a person has. I did not say anything. I simply noticed. The next few days brought more of the same. Longer work lunches. More time spent texting. More evenings where she seemed emotionally somewhere else. Looking back, the signs were probably there for years. The difference was that now I was finally seeing them. One Saturday afternoon, Natalie left her tablet on the couch while she went upstairs to take a call. The screen lit up with a notification. I was not snooping. I was sitting 10 feet away reading project reports for work. But the message appeared large enough to read from across the room. Brandon Pierce. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then another message appeared. Thanks for making my day. A few seconds later came a heart emoji. Not romantic proof. Not some dramatic revelation. Just enough to leave a question hanging in the air. When Natalie returned downstairs, she immediately grabbed the tablet and carried it upstairs with her. The movement was quick, almost instinctive. That bothered me more than the message itself. People only protect things they are afraid of losing. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. The house felt strangely large, like there was more distance between us than the king-sized mattress should have allowed. My mind kept returning to Brandon Pierce. The name repeated itself like a song stuck in my head. The following week, I finally learned who he was. Natalie mentioned him casually during dinner. Brandon helped with the marketing presentation, she said while checking her phone. He is pretty talented. It was the first time I had heard her speak positively about someone with that much enthusiasm in months. Maybe years. I nodded and continued eating. But something inside me took note. Over the next several days, Brandon's name surfaced again. A project meeting, a client event, a conference call. Each mention sounded harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns matter, especially when trust begins to crack. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was sitting on the back patio one evening while Natalie was inside speaking with Amanda on speakerphone. The kitchen window was open. I was not trying to listen. Their voices simply carried through the screen. Amanda laughed and asked, "So what about Brandon?" There was a pause. Then Natalie answered with a laugh of her own. "He actually listens to me." The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they proved anything. They did not. But because I realized she had not said that about me in a very long time. Amanda laughed again. "Sounds like somebody finally appreciates you." Natalie did not correct her. She did not change the subject. She simply laughed along. I sat there listening to the wind move through the trees while something cold settled in my chest. The emotional distance I had been feeling suddenly had a face. A name. A direction. Maybe there was nothing inappropriate happening. Maybe there was. At that point, I honestly did not know. What hurt most was realizing someone else had become the person she shared her excitement with. Someone else received her attention. Someone else received her admiration. And as I stared into the fading Texas sunset, I understood something that frightened me more than any affair ever could. Natalie was already building a future in her mind. The only question left was whether I still existed in it. After that evening, I stopped searching for explanations and started making preparations. There is a difference. One comes from hope. The other comes from acceptance. For nearly 2 decades, I had been the kind of man who believed problems could be solved if you worked hard enough. Longer hours, better communication, more patience, more sacrifice. But sitting alone in my truck one morning before work, watching the sun climb over the Austin skyline, I finally understood something that should have been obvious. You cannot save a relationship by yourself. The realization was strangely calming. Painful, but calming. Because once you stop fighting reality, you can finally start dealing with it. 23 days remained until Natalie's birthday. 23 days until the celebration she was already excited about. I knew because she talked about it constantly. Guest lists, restaurant menus, decorations, weekend plans. She discussed every detail with more enthusiasm than she had shown toward our marriage in years. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One afternoon during lunch, I scheduled a meeting with a family law attorney downtown. The office occupied the 6th floor of a quiet brick building overlooking the river. Nothing dramatic happened there. No shocking revelations. No courtroom speeches. Just facts. Calm, organized facts. The attorney reviewed our finances, our property records, and our legal options. She spoke with the steady confidence of someone who had guided hundreds of people through the same storm. I answered questions, signed paperwork, and listened carefully. Walking back to my truck afterward, I felt lighter than I expected. Not happy, just clear. For the first time in months, I had a direction. Over the following week, I began handling practical details. I opened a separate account for future expenses, updated important documents, reviewed retirement plans, organized records that had been buried in filing cabinets for years. Each task felt small on its own. Together, they formed the outline of a new life. Natalie noticed none of it. That part surprised me most. We still shared the same house, the same kitchen, the same driveway. Yet she seemed completely unaware that the ground beneath our marriage was shifting. Most evenings, she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone while I worked quietly in my home office. Sometimes she laughed at messages. Sometimes she disappeared into long conversations. Sometimes she mentioned Brandon's name in passing. Every time, I simply nodded. The anger I expected never arrived. Instead, I felt something else. Distance. Like watching a train leave a station after already deciding not to board. One Friday evening, I came home to find Natalie and Amanda sitting at the kitchen island drinking wine. Their laughter filled the house. Amanda smiled when she saw me. Natalie barely looked up from her phone. "Hey," she said casually. "Hey," I replied. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Amanda asked if I was excited about the upcoming birthday celebration. Before I could answer, Natalie laughed. "He is probably more excited than I am." The comment sounded harmless. Everyone laughed politely, but something about it stayed with me. Because she was right. For years, I had been carrying the weight of our future almost by myself. Planning, fixing, building, hoping. Meanwhile, she had quietly stopped showing up. Later that night, after Amanda left, I stood alone on the back patio. The air carried the first hint of autumn. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a neighbor's lawn. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet the house behind me no longer felt like home. Not completely. I stared through the kitchen window and watched Natalie smiling at another message on her phone. The glow from the screen reflected softly against her face. She looked happy. Happier than I had seen her in a long time. Oddly enough, that observation brought me peace. Because happiness was never the problem. The problem was that she had found it somewhere else while leaving me behind. 20 days remained until her birthday. 20 days until everything changed. And standing there beneath the Texas night sky, I realized I was no longer preparing to save my marriage. I was preparing to leave it behind. The countdown continued whether I paid attention to it or not. 17 days. Then 15. Then 12. Time moved with the steady rhythm of a clock mounted on a wall nobody notices until it is almost too late. By the second week of October, Natalie was fully consumed by birthday preparations. Every evening seemed to revolve around reservations, guest confirmations, and conversations about the celebration. She spoke about it constantly. Which restaurant looked best? Which friends were coming from out of town? Which dress she planned to wear? Listening to her was like listening to someone planning a vacation while standing on a bridge that was already beginning to collapse. The strange part was that I no longer felt angry. Looking back, that was probably the biggest change. Anger requires emotional investment. It requires hope that things could still be different. What I felt instead was clarity. Every day made my decision easier. Every conversation confirmed it. One evening I arrived home after a long meeting and found several shopping bags spread across the dining room table. Natalie stood nearby scrolling through her phone. She barely noticed me walk in. "What do you think?" she asked, holding up a dark blue dress. I looked at it for a moment. "It looks nice." She smiled at her reflection in the hallway mirror. "I think everybody is going to love it." Everybody. Not us. Not our future. Not our marriage. Just the audience. The distinction mattered more than she realized. Over the next few days, I quietly accelerated my plans. The attorney finalized documents. Financial accounts were organized. Important records were copied and stored safely. I signed a lease for a small apartment overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Nothing luxurious. Just a clean, quiet place where I could start over. The first time I stepped inside, the rooms echoed slightly because they were empty. Sunlight poured through large windows facing the water. Standing there alone, I experienced something unexpected. Relief. Not excitement. Not happiness. Relief. For the first time in years, I could imagine a future that did not depend on someone else's approval. Meanwhile, life inside our house continued exactly as before. Natalie laughed at messages, talked about birthday plans, mentioned Brandon's name more frequently than she probably realized. Once during dinner, she described a joke he had told at work. She laughed harder at that story than she had laughed at anything I said in months. I simply nodded and continued eating. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was informative. 10 days before the birthday, Amanda stopped by again. I was working from home that afternoon and heard their conversation drifting from the kitchen. Most of it was harmless. Party details, travel arrangements, restaurant seating. Then Amanda asked a question that made me stop typing. Do you think Cole suspects anything? There was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough. Natalie laughed softly. Cole notices construction schedules and football scores. He does not notice people. The words settled over me like dust. Amanda laughed. Natalie laughed with her. I stared at my computer screen for several seconds after the conversation moved on. The irony almost made me smile. For years I had noticed everything about her. Her favorite coffee order, her stress habits, the songs she played when she was anxious, the way she rubbed her wrist when she was overwhelmed. I had noticed thousands of small details because I loved her. Somewhere along the way, she had mistaken kindness for blindness. That evening I drove to the apartment after work and carried in the first few boxes. Books, clothes, personal files. Nothing large enough to attract attention if she glanced into the garage. Each trip felt strangely symbolic. One box at a time. One chapter at a time. One goodbye at a time. 7 days remained. Then 5. Then 3. The birthday dinner reservation was confirmed. Guests had begun arriving from Dallas and Houston. Natalie seemed happier than ever. Watching her was like watching someone celebrate a victory before the final score had been announced. The night before the birthday, I sat alone in the apartment overlooking the dark water. The city lights shimmered across the lake like scattered stars. My phone remained silent. The room around me was simple, quiet, honest. And as midnight approached, I realized something important. Natalie still believed she controlled the story. She thought tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter. What she did not understand was that tomorrow was actually the ending. The morning of Natalie's birthday arrived bright and clear, the kind of Texas autumn day that makes people open windows and believe everything is exactly as it should be. I woke up before sunrise in the apartment and sat quietly with a cup of coffee overlooking the lake. The water reflected the pale orange sky like polished glass. For a long time, I simply watched the lights spread across the city. No anxiety, no panic, no second thoughts, just a strange sense of calm. The decision had already been made weeks earlier. Today was simply the day reality finally caught up. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Where are you? We have brunch with my parents at 11. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking the phone again. A second message arrived a few minutes later. Everything okay? Neither message mentioned concern. Neither asked if I was safe. They felt more like scheduling questions than anything else. That observation hurt more than I expected. 19 years together, and somehow we had become calendar entries in each other's lives. By noon, the birthday celebration was already underway. Friends and family had started arriving from across Texas. The dinner reservation that Natalie spent months planning was scheduled for 6:30 that evening at an upscale restaurant overlooking the river. From everything I heard, the event was exactly what she wanted. Elegant decorations, expensive wine, dozens of guests, the perfect audience. Meanwhile, I spent the afternoon finalizing the last details with my attorney. A courier service was scheduled. Documents were prepared. Instructions were clear. Every piece had been carefully arranged long before that day arrived. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no public argument, no emotional scene. I had learned something important during those 30 days. Sometimes silence carries more weight than any speech ever could. By 5 o'clock, my phone was buzzing constantly. Calls from Natalie, messages from Amanda, even a text from Natalie's mother asking if I was running late. I ignored all of them, not out of cruelty, simply because there was nothing left to discuss. At 6:28, guests were settling into their seats inside the restaurant. I knew because Amanda posted a photograph online. Smiling faces, candlelight, white tablecloths. Natalie standing at the center of it all in the dark blue dress she had shown me weeks earlier. Looking at the image felt strangely distant, like watching footage from someone else's life. Then 6:30 arrived, and 6:40, and 6:50. According to Amanda's next post, Natalie was becoming irritated. Guests kept asking where I was. She apparently laughed it off at first. Traffic. Work emergency. Last-minute delay. Reasonable explanations. The kind people invent when they do not know the truth. At 7 o'clock, the courier entered the restaurant carrying a sealed envelope. My attorney later described the scene in detail. The envelope was addressed directly to Natalie Harrison. The courier requested that she sign for delivery. Several guests reportedly applauded, assuming it was some kind of surprise gift. In a way, it was. Natalie signed the receipt, opened the envelope, and everything changed. Inside were divorce papers, a letter, and a single key attached to a small metal tag. The key belonged to the house. Witnesses later told me the room became completely silent. Not gradually, instantly. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone realizes they are no longer attending the same event they thought they were attending. Natalie stared at the first page for several seconds. Then she turned to the letter. I know exactly what it said because I spent nearly a week writing it. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted clarity. The opening sentence was simple. Natalie, 30 days ago, I heard something I was never supposed to hear. The letter continued for 2 pages. No accusations, no insults, no anger, just truth. I explained that I had heard the conversation, the laughter, the comments, the wish that I would disappear before her birthday. I explained that those words had changed everything. And then came the final paragraph, the one I knew she would remember forever. You once said that if I vanished before your birthday, it would be the best gift anyone could give you. I spent 30 days thinking about those words. In the end, I decided to honor your request. Happy birthday, Natalie. I am finally giving you exactly what you wanted. By the time she reached the last sentence, I imagined the room no longer looked the same. Because sometimes the most shocking thing is not losing someone. It is realizing they stopped fighting for you a long time ago. While Natalie sat frozen inside that restaurant, I was driving west along a quiet stretch of highway with the radio turned off. The city lights slowly disappeared behind me. For the first time in months, there was no noise in my head. No second-guessing. No rehearsed conversations. No wondering whether I was making the right choice. The decision was already behind me. The consequences belonged to someone else now. Around 8 o'clock, my phone began lighting up. Call after call. Message after message. Natalie. Amanda. Her mother. Her father. Friends I had not spoken to in years. The screen glowed continuously on the passenger seat like an alarm that refused to stop ringing. I never answered. Not because I wanted to punish anyone. Because there was nothing left to explain. The letter had already said everything that mattered. Later, I would learn what happened after Natalie finished reading it. According to several people who were there, she sat motionless for nearly a full minute. Nobody touched their food. Nobody spoke. The birthday celebration that had been months in the making suddenly felt like a room full of strangers attending the wrong event. Amanda reportedly tried to break the silence first. She asked whether there had been some misunderstanding. Natalie did not answer. She simply kept staring at the pages in front of her. Then she began calling me. Again and again. Each unanswered call seemed to make the reality sink in a little deeper. The part that affected her most was not the divorce paperwork. It was the timeline. 30 days. 30 entire days. That was what shocked her. She realized I had heard those words a month earlier and never said a thing. Never argued. Never confronted her. Never tried to stop her. While she planned a birthday celebration, I had been quietly planning an exit. People often assume heartbreak arrives in one dramatic moment. In my experience, it arrives in stages. First comes disbelief, then confusion, then the uncomfortable search for answers. That night, Natalie apparently moved through all 3. Around 9:30, she left the restaurant before dessert was served. Several guests followed her outside. Others quietly paid their bills and left. A few remained seated, staring at untouched meals and half-empty wine glasses. The celebration she had imagined was gone. In its place stood a question nobody could answer. How long had things been broken without anyone noticing? I received the answer to another question shortly before midnight. Brandon Pierce finally called. It was the first time he had ever contacted me directly. I watched his name appear on the screen while sitting on the balcony of my apartment overlooking the dark lake. The irony almost made me laugh. For weeks, maybe months, he had occupied space in my marriage without ever speaking to me. Now he was calling. I let the phone ring until it stopped. Then I blocked the number. Whatever role he had played in Natalie's life no longer mattered. My story was moving forward. Whether theirs survived was not my concern. The following morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls and more than 40 messages. Most shared the same theme: shock, confusion, apologies, questions. Natalie had apparently spent part of the night driving between the house and the apartment address she eventually found in public records. By then, I was already gone. Not far away, just unavailable. There is a difference. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and watched rowers moving across the lake in long, silent lines. The sunrise painted the water gold. The city slowly came alive around me. Traffic increased. Joggers appeared along the trails. Life continued with remarkable indifference to personal tragedy. That was when I noticed something surprising. I was not sad, at least not in the way I expected. The grief had happened weeks earlier. It happened the night I stood in my own hallway holding a birthday cake while listening to my wife wish for my disappearance. Everything after that was simply paperwork. The real ending had already occurred. What Natalie was experiencing now was the beginning of her realization. Mine had started 30 days ago. And as I looked out across the calm morning water, I understood something she still had not learned. Losing someone rarely begins when they walk away. It begins the moment they stop believing there is a reason to stay. The weeks that followed felt nothing like I expected. Movies and television always make people believe freedom arrives with fireworks, dramatic speeches, or some overwhelming sense of victory. The truth was much quieter. Freedom arrived through ordinary mornings. It arrived through peaceful cups of coffee, through evenings that no longer felt heavy, through silence that no longer needed to be filled. By November, the divorce process was moving steadily forward. My attorney handled most of the communication. I rarely needed to participate. Natalie attempted to contact me several times during those first weeks. Voicemails, emails, text messages. Some were angry. Some were confused. Some sounded almost desperate. I listened to none of them. Not because I hated her. The opposite, actually. I had spent too many years making her emotions my responsibility. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning how to let someone else carry their own. Work became my anchor. The company promoted me to oversee several major commercial projects throughout Central Texas. The new position required travel, larger responsibilities, and longer-term planning. Under different circumstances, I might have hesitated. For years, I had shaped career decisions around preserving a marriage that no longer existed. Now there was nothing holding me back. I accepted immediately. The strange thing was how quickly life began opening doors once I stopped standing in my own way. December arrived with cool mornings and clear skies. The apartment overlooking the lake slowly started feeling like home. Books filled the shelves. Pictures of Tyler occupied the desk in my office. Familiar routines developed naturally. Saturday mornings became long walks along the waterfront trails. Sunday afternoons became football games and phone calls with friends I had neglected for years. Looking back, I realized how small my world had become during the final years of my marriage. Everything revolved around keeping the peace, keeping schedules, keeping appearances. Now I was finally building something for myself. Around Christmas, Tyler came to visit. He was 21 by then, studying engineering at Texas A&M and carrying himself with the quiet confidence young men develop when they begin figuring out who they are. We spent 3 days together, watched football, grilled steaks on the apartment balcony, talked about classes, internships, and life. At one point, he asked a question I had been expecting for months. "Are you okay?" I remember smiling. Not the polite smile people use when they want to avoid difficult conversations. A real one. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." He nodded slowly. Then he said something I never forgot. "You seem lighter." The observation stayed with me long after he returned to school. Because he was right. I was lighter. The constant tension I had carried for years was gone. The feeling that I needed to earn love, earn approval, earn my place in someone else's life. All of it had disappeared. Meanwhile, bits and pieces of Natalie's life occasionally reached me through mutual friends. Not gossip, just facts. The large social circle that once surrounded her had grown smaller. Amanda was spending less time around her. Several friendships had cooled. Brandon Pierce was no longer mentioned. I never asked questions, never requested updates. But the pattern was difficult to miss. It turns out that attention is easy to receive during celebrations. Support becomes much rarer during consequences. One evening in early January, I returned home after a long day at work. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city lights reflected across the dark water below. I sat alone in the living room and looked around the apartment. Nothing about it was extraordinary. The furniture was simple. The rooms were modest. The view was nice, but not spectacular. Yet for the first time in years, everything felt honest. There were no performances here. No pretending. No waiting for someone to appreciate sacrifices they no longer valued. Just peace. Real peace. And as I watched the rain move across the lake, I realized something important. Natalie had spent years searching for happiness somewhere else. New people, new attention, new excitement. Meanwhile, the thing I had been searching for was much simpler. I did not need a different life. I only needed a life where I was no longer unwanted. And somewhere between the divorce papers, the quiet mornings, and the months spent rebuilding myself, I had finally found it. Almost a year passed before I saw Natalie again. By then, the divorce had been finalized. The paperwork was complete. The legal process was over. What remained were only memories, and even those had started losing their sharp edges. Life has a way of moving forward when you stop standing still. My career continued to grow. Tyler was doing well in school. The apartment overlooking the lake had become a real home. The mornings felt lighter. The nights felt quieter. Most importantly, I no longer woke up wondering whether I was enough for someone else. One Saturday afternoon in early September, I was leaving a bookstore downtown when I heard someone call my name. The voice stopped me instantly. I turned around and saw Natalie standing near the entrance. For a moment, neither of us moved. She looked different. Not older exactly. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. She took a hesitant step forward. "Cole," she said softly. "Can we talk?" A year earlier, hearing those words would have changed my entire day. Now they felt like a distant echo from another life. I glanced toward a nearby coffee shop and nodded. We sat across from each other near a window overlooking the street. People passed outside carrying shopping bags and iced coffees. Cars rolled through the intersection. Life continued around us without noticing the significance of the moment. Natalie wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. For several seconds, she stared down at it before finally speaking. "I never thought you would actually leave." The sentence hung between us. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was honest. More honest than anything she had said in years. "I know," I replied. She nodded slowly. Her eyes filled with regret. "I thought you would argue. I thought you would fight. I thought you would try to convince me to stay." Looking back, I realized that was exactly what she had expected. For years I had been the one trying harder. Fixing problems. Carrying the weight. Absorbing disappointment. She had mistaken consistency for permanence. She believed I would always be there because I always had been. Until I was not. "You know what hurts the most?" she asked quietly. I did not answer. She continued anyway. "The house never felt the same after you left." I looked out the window. Cars moved through the afternoon sunlight. Somewhere nearby, a musician was playing guitar. The world felt peaceful. "It was never the house," I said. "It was the people inside it." Natalie lowered her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. "I made a mistake." There it was. The sentence she had probably rehearsed 100 times. The sentence she hoped might change something. A year earlier, it might have. But timing matters. Sometimes the distance between regret and redemption is measured in moments. Other times it is measured in years. "I know," I said gently. We sat in silence after that. Not an uncomfortable silence. Just an honest one. Finally, Natalie looked at me and asked the question I knew was coming. "Is there any chance for us?" I looked at the woman I had once planned to spend the rest of my life with. The woman whose happiness I had prioritized for nearly 2 decades. The woman who taught me one of the hardest lessons I would ever learn. Then I smiled. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just acceptance. "The day you wished I would disappear," I said quietly, "was the day I started letting go." Tears filled her eyes again. This time she did not try to hide them. I stood, placed a few dollars on the table for my coffee, and picked up my jacket. "Take care of yourself, Natalie." Then I walked away. No dramatic ending. No final argument. No revenge. Just a man continuing toward a life he had rebuilt one piece at a time. As I stepped outside into the warm Texas sunlight, I felt something I had not felt in years. Gratitude. Not for the pain. Not for the mistakes. But for the lesson. Because sometimes losing the life you planned is the only way to discover the life you deserve. And before this story ends, I would love to know your thoughts. What would you have done if you were standing in Cole's shoes? Would you have stayed and fought for the marriage? Or would you have walked away the moment you heard those words? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this remind you of the value of self-respect, personal growth, and knowing when it is time to move forward, consider subscribing so you do not miss future stories. Sometimes the most important journey is not finding the right person. It is finding yourself again after you thought you were lost.